Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back to Apollo Art Analysis. Today we're going to be looking at a piece by the artist axis.psd. Axis is an artist working primarily in the medium of digital rendering. And in this piece we're going to talk a little bit about center emphasis, we're going to talk about the brutalist style of architectural design, we're going to talk a little bit about light and magic, we're going to talk about the influence of cyberpunk art, and then we're also going to tie it back to some of Axis's other works as well. So let's jump right into it. So in your initial introduction, you're likely going to be caught by either this orangish color or kind of this center region of the spatial composition. So just to start off, we're going to start out with the layout here. So whenever you first see this piece, obviously note the color against the darkness, but we also see how the spatial composition is kind of split into three main lanes. And you see those lanes are created by, say, these two bumpers to start off of those two large buildings. Let me redo that other one. So we have two bumpers there, and then we kind of have the outline or the main facing about right there, because you kind of have that front facing there. And you can think of this as three lanes. You could kind of say one lane, two lanes, and three lanes. Or alternatively, you could say kind of five individual lanes, which is what I tend to go towards. So what you'll see here is either of these very large buildings kind of create a bumper or these sidelines or a border which emphasizes the center region. And so that really directs our attention in the middle, and that's really important whenever we're talking about layout specifically. What you'll see is that the artist places we kind of have a double perspective here, right? If that's the main form of the building, we're kind of viewing it, we're viewing it from a multi, kind of two angles there. And this really commands the center region of the spatial composition. It accents itself through kind of a dark on light contrast. See, all of this kind of this pocket region around the main building has a little bit of color, a lot of light around here as well. And so that's what allows kind of the silhouette or the shadow of this main building to emphasize itself through a dark on light contrast. What you'll also note is a little bit of Mandarin here. I believe that's Mandarin, written here in the top region, and then also contrasts itself. So those all work together to really draw your eyes to that part of the spatial composition. So what you'll see is we see a very large urban setting, and this is a really dark setting as well, right? You have these, of course, all these lights are off. These look like individual windows. You have some lights that are on, and then you kind of have these holograms going in and out here. But just notice the amount of scale within this work. See, we have, for reference, we have a lone figure here. Let's say he's about 6 feet tall, so he's standing. He's looking at this scene, which is just dozens of stories high. So that's a really stunning scene, and that grand sense of scale really invites the viewer. It feels like it's kind of larger than life there. And what we'll also see is that that's quite common with the cyberpunk genre. The individual is often lost to the collective, or kind of the collective populace. So the individual is taken away in exchange for these large megacities, and really any loss of individuality within that. So in terms of kind of in the realm of architectural design, we see a really good example of the Brutalist style here. And if you want to identify the Brutalist style, what we're mainly looking for are smooth facings and then a rugged, concrete, dark aesthetic there. So if you look on the surrounding buildings, they are, of course, you have to have windows there, so maybe it goes a little bit away from brutalism in that respect. But overall, you see these smooth facings in combination with that dark gray, kind of graphite-esque concrete aesthetic. And so that really identifies the brutalist medium, or the brutalist stylistic influence. And that's quite important because brutalism has always been seen as kind of strong. It's been seen as minimalist, but a lot of people don't really like it because it's quite rugged and it feels very dark. And I think that really contributes to this dark aesthetic within the piece at hand. So that can really be attributed to the brutalist architectural style. In the realm of, say, genre, we see a stunning cyberpunk experience, and we're going to take a look at one of his other works here in a second as well. But the cyberpunk genre is a big genre at the moment. We see, of course, it broke off from the kind of main branch of punk, and then it also intersects with science fiction quite masterfully as well. And as I said before, cyberpunk is normally defined by the loss of individual to the collective populace, the massive megacities where you're kind of just lost in a sea of people, in a sea of culture, in a sea of just so much going on within these megacity environments. And we see art reflecting that quite a bit. Another really important aspect of the cyberpunk genre is the idea of a authoritarian surveillance state, which uses that surveillance apparatus to spy on its citizens, and it also uses kind of the intersection of screen-based devices, also the intersection of augmented and virtual reality in order to incorporate everything as well. You also see quite a bit of influence of consumer culture in cyberpunk as well, so I think that's also important to note. So we see just a stunning example of a really dark cyberpunk aesthetic here, and that dark cyberpunk aesthetic, of course, connects to that brutalist architecture, but it also connects to this kind of night scene here, right? You have what feels like fire just emerging from the bottom region or the nether region of the spatial composition. And I think those are all really important whenever we're taking a look at this work. So in terms of what you'll notice here is you see that there's these kind of glowing fish holograms, right? And they look like they're in a path of hovering around. You see what appears to be, they're kind of just circling around this main building here. And these really intrigue me because what we're seeing nowadays is that big companies, whether it's consumer culture or corporations, everything in between, what they're doing is they're using our primal sense of light and magic in order to push their brands. So if this were an advertisement, for example, someone would be quite mesmerized by seeing a hologram, kind of a massive fish just fly by them. And I feel that companies use this mesmerization and kind of appropriate that light and magic in order to capture the viewer's attention to the highest degree possible. You see artists partnering with companies, corporations, and everything to kind of subject art to the consumer eye or the consumer culture. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because art can really liven and invigorate us. But I think we should be careful whenever we're kind of caught in that, because if you're mesmerized by a scene like this, you're quite likely to support the brand that it came from. And so there's kind of this higher power that's appropriated by some companies in order to use consumer culture and these new technologies. So I think that's pretty important to note. And so, all these companies are just competing in these new landscapes. One of the best examples I see is how you have brands now, or musicians, for example, partnering with Fortnite. So now even within video games, we have kind of brands and advertisements and things like that. And it's hard to say whether that's a good or a bad thing, and we'll really see how that plays out over time. But I really see how this light and magic is used within this work to feel like there's something incredible going on here. And even though this is quite a dark piece, these golden fish holograms they give that aesthetic of fire. And that is incorporated by this almost molten aesthetic coming from the bottom region of the piece here. It's almost radiating as you see kind of these little particles all around there. And so these fish are quite stunning. It's almost surreal because we haven't seen anything quite like this before. But I think those are really important to note. And those, of course, add that light accent and that divine accent against this really dark aesthetic that we see. It's nighttime, and it's also that brutalist aesthetic. So those, provide a sense of magic, a sense of light, and an accent within the spatial composition. A little bit of kind of color-based rarity there as well. And what you'll notice here is you see a lone hero here in the bottom region of the spatial composition. And this lone hero is just dwarfed by this large scene. Earlier, we talked about that grand sense of scale, and I think that's incredibly important. Whenever you tie that into the cyberpunk genre, an individual can feel like a drop in the bucket in these massive cyberpunk megacities. So I think that's really important to note. In the term of the title, it's entitled, I believe it's called KAIIDTH. And KAIIDTH is a term that really means acceptance. And not censored acceptance, but acceptance with the spirit of carrying on. And so whenever I look at a work like this, you see this really dark aesthetic. Maybe this lone hero is going through some really tough times. If you live, say, in a cyberpunk city with a brutalist aesthetic and a surveillance state, it could be quite difficult. And so using the spirit of that title KAIIDTH. You can use that carry on and that acceptance spirit to just keep moving even in the darkest times in your life. So I think that's really important to note. That's kind of just what I see whenever I look at this piece here. So a really dark aesthetic. It captures the spirit of cyberpunk quite masterfully, and that brutalist aesthetic is really, really influential. So now we're going to take a look at I believe this is Axis's second showcase to date. So here I have another one of Axis's pieces here. And so whenever we're taking a look at this, you see he has... Oh, I actually just noticed this. So what you'll see is there's a fish here, fish hologram. So maybe Axis really likes those fish holograms. And what you'll see here, this shows that consumer culture within cyberpunk art quite well. And we talked a lot about that. There's this sense of light and magic that the companies use to really draw on your attention. And that could be a good thing or it could be a bad thing. For someone who is kind of a little bit naive, they may be pulled into that light and magic and kind of, they're almost tricked into buying something whenever it's created in art, and you just feel mesmerized, like you have to get involved in stuff. So within these works, what I see here is the holograms, consumer culture. The holograms are definitely something that go across both works. A dark aesthetic in both of these as well, but this dark aesthetic, say in this piece, is contrasted by the amount of light within the work. So that's quite stunning there. We also see the grand sense of scale depicted in both pieces as well. So I think that's also important to note. It's quite clear that Axis loves cyberpunk art and also loves holograms and loves that grand sense of scale. So that's really what I see. I believe these are both of his showcases to date. Like I said, I think this is his second showcase and this was his first. So this marks his second showcase into the Apollo Art Archive, and it's been absolutely stunning to study. I'm trying to look more at some cyberpunk art lately, and I think this was a really good piece. You can contrast both here because, say, in the right piece, you have a really dark aesthetic, that dark cyberpunk experience. And in here, it is still, dark. We have, of course, it's at nighttime and it's in a dark city, but these stunning violet tones and the magenta and the blue, those really work to invigorate the experience. So I kind of see like an ice and fire aesthetic here in contrast and juxtaposition with each other. So I just wanted to compare those pieces there. And as I said before, he really likes that cyberpunk, those holograms, and also that grand sense of scale. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you guys learned something. Go check out some of Axis's other pieces. Like I said, the artist works primarily in the medium of digital rendering. So you see just a ton of renderings, mostly science fiction at that, and just some stunning work coming from this artist. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you guys learned something. We talked about the brutalist aesthetic, we talked about cyberpunk art, and all of the influences in between. So my name is Apollo. This was Apollo Art Analysis, and I'll see you guys on the next episode. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you'd like to support our work directly, please check out our Apollo community tokens. Apollo Art Exchange is an ecosystem of art appreciation which elevates artists each and every day. Thanks for listening.